I believe you must be seeing my presentation. Can someone confirm? Yeah. Okay, so perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. As previously mentioned, my name is Anna. I'm here today, and I wanted to start by thank you for the invitations to be here. I'm here on behalf of Dr. Joao Breda, that unfortunately couldn't join us in this presentation, but has kindly requested me to deliver this presentation on his behalf. And as I believe we are on a tight schedule, maybe I'll just start right away with our presentation. Today we will focus on the WHO dietary recommendations and health. And we wanted to start with a very brief introduction and overview, and really highlighting this idea that maintaining a healthy diet throughout the life course will help us to prevent all forms of malnutrition. And here we are talking about under and overnutrition, and also a range of non-communicable diseases and other conditions. However, what we see today is really with the increase of the production of processed foods, the rapid urbanization, and this changing lifestyle has led us to this shift in dietary patterns. And what we see today is that people consume more foods high in energies, fat, free sugars, and salt or sodium. And they don't eat enough fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. But what do we mean when we talk about a healthy diet, and what are we meaning when we talk about these dietary recommendations? And here we wanted to start from the adult's point of view, and really saying that when we mean a healthy diet, we comprise a combination of different foods, such as, for example, the staples like the cereals, the starchy tubers or roots, the legumes that are often forgotten to be included in the dietary patterns. And of course, we also talk about having a diverse range of fruits and vegetables, and also the animal sources that will mainly provide us with the adequate intake of protein as a source, for example, the meat, the fish, eggs, and so on. And for example, we wanted to highlight these four main ideas of these healthy diets for adults, and starting, for example, here with the fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and whole grains. We talk about an at least 400 grams consumption, which is equivalent to 5 portions of fruits and vegetables per day. And also these recommendations that we talk about having less than 10% of the total energy intake from free sugars. And here, if we are considering a person that consumes around 2,000 calories per day, this should be under the 50 grams. But ideally, we always talk about having less than 5% of the total energy intake, so we can have these additional health benefits. In regards to fat, we try to have it less than 30% of the total energy intake. And of course, as we know, and that it's widely written in the evidence nowadays, we should always prefer the unsaturated fats, such as the olive oil. In regards to the saturated fats and trans fats of all kinds, that should be avoided. The last recommendation that we bring here today is regarding the salt consumption. That should be less than the 5 grams of salt per day. And if possible, we always advise to have the salt iodized. More specific to this target of infants and young children, this is a specific period that we also focus, and we make specific recommendations because, as we know, this optimal nutrition in the first 2 years of life of the children really will help her grow in a healthy way and enhance their cognitive development, lower the risk of becoming overweight or later in life developing obesity or other NCDs. And here in these target groups, we strongly focus on the breastfeeding, which is very important. And here we have this recommendation that infants should be breastfed exclusively during the first 6 months of life. Of course, this can be a bit adjusted if the children is already presenting some signs that the complementary food can be introduced. We can start a bit earlier, a bit later, so we can adjust. But normally, around the 6 months of life is when we see this transition, and the infant should be and could be breastfed continuously until the 2 years of age and beyond. And as I mentioned before, like from the 6 months of age, we can complement the breast milk with this complemented food that should provide a variety of adequate, safe, and nutrition-dense food. And here we also have this recommendation that we should avoid or even not add the salt and sugar to these complementary foods and these first foods introduced to the children's. Here, I just wanted to give a brief update by saying that recently in July 2023, we had a recent updates on the guidelines on regards to fats and carbohydrates. Unfortunately, because we have a short presentation today, I cannot go over all of the details and all of the guidance and updates that were made on these reports. But if you have the opportunity, I strongly suggest that you have a look on what we updated on these documents. But the first one was this one that presented here on saturated fatty acids and trans fatty acids intake for adults and children. But we also developed this on total fat intake for the prevention of unhealthy weight gain in adults and children. And lastly, this new update on the carbohydrate intake for adults and children. When we move into this part of dietary recommendations and health, which was the highlight of this presentation, we can see there is a strong evidence and a very extensive one in regards to the benefits of having an adequate intake of these components. And starting, for example, with the fruit and vegetables, we see that following this recommendation of having at least 400 grams, which is equivalent to the 5 portions of fruits and vegetables per day, will help to reduce this risk of NCDs, to ensure that we have a daily intake of the fiber. And we also see these new and recent studies showing also that this adequate intake of fruit and vegetables, it's also very good and will enhance the overall mental health and well-being of adolescents, adults. In regards, for example, in the studies we can see that an adequate consumption was associated with higher levels of optimism, a reduced level of psychological distress. It will protect them against depressive symptoms, and so on and so on. When we move on to the fat and the salt and sodium, we can also see a very extensive articles and evidence in regards to this. And for example, here when we talk about fats, it is very important that the intake is adequate, not also in terms of quantities, but also the qualities. So as I mentioned before, always prefer the unsaturated fats. And it's very crucial in this, for example, during the pregnant, the lacting women, infant children's. So we see here a great importance of that. And also, for example, the influence of overheating these oils and the trans fatties. When we move into the salt and sodium and potassium, what we know nowadays is that a high intake of sodium and an insufficient intake of potassium will contribute to this high blood pressure, which will increase, of course, the risk of heart disease or stroke or cardiovascular event. And sometimes the problem with salt is that people are often unaware of the amount of salt they consume. And today, with this increase of consumption on processed foods, of the ready meals, of these delivery servers that are more and more available, and also other sources, such as, for example, the bread that is widely consumed in our region, or the salt added to foods during the cooking, or even at the table salt, is really the main sources that we should look into when we are trying to adjust these patterns and these dietary habits. Lastly, in regards to sugar and health, we know that a high consumption of these free sugars is associated, of course, with some dental health risks, for example, the tooth decay. But we also have this part of the weight management. And here we can, of course, talk about the excessive calories that we get from the drinks high in free sugars that are, of course, linked with overweight and obesity. And lastly, this cardiovascular impact that it's also very widely studied. Now, why do we bring here the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals? It's of course because everything here is linked. So when we talk about having an adequate intake, when we talk about following these dietary recommendations, they are strongly aligned with achieving these Sustainable Development Goals that the UN developed until 2030. So, for example, if we look into the second target on ending malnutrition, or the third target of achieving a good health and well-being, we know that following these dietary patterns and these recommendations will help us and will be influencing all of these areas. We also thought it would be important to bring here to the participants listening to us today our European program of work. And here you can see the three core priorities of this program that we have in the WHO European region, being, for example, the third one, promoting health and well-being, and also our 4 flagship initiatives. In this slide, we tried to make a snapshot of a bit of the work that we've been developing in our region. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go over all of these documents individually, but we wanted to give a very brief overview of what we've been developing lately, and saying that there's a lot of tools and manuals to support the member states in achieving these goals and these dietary recommendations, such as, for example, these initiatives regarding the salt reduction, also this part of reformulating the food and the drinks available to the consumer, the taxation of some products, and also a great importance on not only achieving these healthy diets, but making them also sustainable. Here also just briefly showing more into the quality of care spectrum, some documents that we believed in our office that really reflect the policy and technical guidance that we believe on quality assurance and evidence-based medicine, a quality improvement always linked with a digital transformation as well, the value-based healthcare, and always keeping in mind the patient experience and their safety. And to finalize our presentation, we wanted to just make a quick snapshot and just briefly showing where do we stand. And all of this information that I will present in the next slides, you can have them in more detail and analyze them at the global database on the implementation of food and nutrition action. But starting with these sugar country scorecards, what we see is that more than a fifth of the world's population live in countries with mandatory measures towards sugar's reduction, including mandatory declaration of sugar. So this is almost 20% of the world's population. Then in regards to the sodium, so here we have the sodium country scorecard, and what we see is that more than a quarter, around 30% of the world's population already lives in countries with mandatory measures towards this sodium reduction, which also include the mandatory declaration of sodium. The next one we presented here is the sugar sweetened beverage taxations. And here we can see at a dark blue color the national level, then a lighter blue the subnational level tax, and lastly the lightest blue the municipality level. And what we see here is that more than a half of the world's population, so around 60%, is already currently covered by this national level taxes on the sugar sweetened beverages. The next one that I presented here is in regards to the food reformulation. And here we can see that also around 60% of the world's population are already living in countries that implement these mandatory reformulations to reduce the content of fats, sugar, and sodium in foods. And for example, if we focused on our region, in the WHO European region, we can see that the majority of countries have already adopted these mandatory reformulations or a mandatory and voluntary reformulation of the products available in their countries. And lastly, we also mention here the front of pack and other interpretive nutrition label, because this is, of course, of a great concern of making the consumers more aware of what they are consuming and empower them while choosing the food they consume. So here we can see that already 10% of the world's populations live in countries that implement a mandatory front of pack labeling policies. And with this, I finish our presentation. I want to thank you all for your attention. It was quite short, but I think I kept it on time. And I leave here my contacts and the contact of Dr. Joao Breda. And thank you so much and have a lovely course ahead.